Hi, this is Dominic Sperano from Sperano Arts, ceramic educator and master potter. The video you're about to watch was shot at the Brick Studio in St. James, and I'm focusing on teaching how to make multiple size plates. So if you're having trouble making plates, I hope this video helps, and enjoy.
So there's a lot of ways to do it. What I'm going to show you is how to make a bread plate, how to make a tapas plate, how to make a dinner plate. Each have different specifications and different sizes. Okay, the bread plate and the dinner plate are pretty much just the same thing, just with more or less clay. The tapas plate is slightly different. You're probably going to need, well, obviously going to need a sponge, your wire tool, pin tool, a wood knife, a wood rib, and as always a red rubber rib from Mud Tools. Okay, so first things first, you want to center. And because it's a plate, you want to center pretty low. That's half of it right there, just getting the diameter by centering kind of low. Okay, you're going to want to open low, so you don't really go too deep. It's very shallow. Really, it's more like just a finger indent. So if this was the clay, I'm pushing, so I'm just about a small amount of pressure. And then you pull open. And you keep pulling till you get it almost open right to the edge. Okay? At this point, it's always a good idea to try and smooth things out. A lot of people have this misconception of a plate. For some reason, even though we all eat off of them, everyone thinks like a plate, not everyone, but a lot of people, especially potters when they're trying to make a plate, they think a plate is a very flat disc, which I never understood. A plate is not just flat disc. If you ever ate off a flat disc, you're going to notice your food's going to go all over the table. It's not very convenient. A plate is really more of a very shallow bowl, like a really shallow bowl. You want to have a bit of a curve in there, right? Because that keeps the food on the plate, which is the freaking point of the plate. So from here, you're going to see me start bending, kind of like I would with a bowl. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can do it with your hands and a sponge. I like to do it with a chamois cloth. If you don't have a chamois cloth, you can take a piece of newspaper and fold it, and this will work as a cheap one-shot chamois. This is good for like a session of throwing. So I hold it between my two fingers, right? I wrap it backward here. I'm going to put my index finger against the clay and bring this over. Okay, now I'm going to hold this normally. And I'm going to push out.
You're pushing out
With my left hand. And I'm just kind of tightening up this faux chamois cloth. And as I do it, it continues to compress the rim and make it nice. Okay. At this point, I usually check. And I want to have at least 6 inches. And I got actually more than 6 inches, so I'm really good. Typically, you want about 6.5 because you have to account for shrinkage. And a typical bread plate is between 5.5, 6 inches, roughly speaking, handmade. You know, mass-produced, it's like 5.5 exactly. But you're allowed to fudge a little bit because it's handmade. So I'm going to use the curved side here. And I'm going to work my way out. And again, just like I did with the bowl, I stop at a certain point. And now I'm going to switch it so I have more of the, what's the word, not acute, but an oblique, obtuse, I guess, more of like the wider angle here. And that's going to really determine the width, the curve of the plate. I used to work with this. I may just use this just to make sure it's nice and smooth. I don't really cut this off that much because I've already kind of compressed it, so I know it's pretty strong. I will use my sponge though just to really round it out. I'll wire it once. And then here's the key, I leave it on the bat. I do not take it off the bat. Now, because I'm not taking it off the bat, it's sort of problematic for a group studio, like a communal studio, because there's only so many bats, and you don't want to eat up all the bats. So if you're going to do this, only make one plate per class or throwing session. Do not. You can't make 24. Even if you can make 24, don't make 24. Okay? Because you don't want to eat up all the bats. Now, if you end up having your own studio and your own house and your basement and garage or whatever that with, you make as many as you like. But you want to be considerate of everyone, one plate per time. So if anyone comes up to you and says, like, hey, I have a wedding coming up, can you make me a dinner set? You just say no. Okay? You should just say no in general because dinner sets suck to make. You get about halfway through them and you ask yourself, why did I decide to say yes to this? This was a terrible idea.
And then do people complain?
Oh, people always complain. Okay, so dinner plate. Same technique.
No, you said this is 4 pounds?
This is about 4 pounds of clay, yeah. Once again, real shallow. And just so you know, I'm already at 8 inches, just going that shallow. Same deal. Pull the knee. This part is my own technique, marrying it with how I open everything else up. Some people are going to be like, oh, you got to compress, you got to compress, you got to compress. I find if you just leave it alone, it's good. Like, you want to clean it up and make it smooth, but there are people who say, oh, you got to keep pushing. You know, that's how you get rid of the S-cracks. You get rid of the S-cracks by not trying to take it off the bat and put it on something until it's, like, really quite dry. Now, if I didn't want to do this with a chamois, I can, like I said, do it with my hands. I would keep the sponge underneath here and pull with my fingers. And I'm just pushing under and pulling over. And at this point, I got about 9.5, almost 10 inches. I want to go just a little bit more.
I see you're not checking the depth.
No, because I'm leaving a lot of clay. I'm keeping it very thick. Another thing that people do, they make them really thin. When you make it really thin, it's probably going to break, especially when you try and trim it, right? I want it thick because I want to be able to have a lot of room to trim this. I want it really durable. Especially, you got to assume, this is a plate. It's going to go in and out of dishwashers, right? You don't want it so thin and fragile. All right, so I'm at about 10 inches. It's a little short, but that's okay.
What is it typically?
Portion
10 and a
control.
half. Yeah, portion control.
Oh, yeah.
It's typically about 10.5, 11. Okay.
So say you wanted to make it bigger, is it too late now, Dominic, at this point?
Yeah, I wouldn't push it much more.
Okay.
So what you might need is more like 4.5 pounds of clay.
Well, they do say the smaller your plate, the larger your portion will look, so you'll eat less.
That's true.
It's the problem is when you have the big plate and then you put a little portion,
Right,
it just
right.
looks empty.
They do say one way to like lose weight, just smaller
And
plates.
you're in a French restaurant, right?
So it's Saturday Night Live.
Mhm.
That guy in the little.
So as you can see, same thing. I'm using the curve It's going to be a very similar curve to that one. And because I didn't use the chamois, I'm going to trim it just a little bit. When you trim something like this, you kind of have to go from the inside. You can't really do it from the outside.
And are you thinking about the foot at this point, or no thought at all?
Not at all.
Okay.
Thinking about having a nice thick plate. It'll be very durable. Won't break. Again, just about that 10-inch mark, which is not bad. I'm pretty certain, like, when this is finished, if I gave you a piece of food on this, you wouldn't mind it.
Wouldn't what?
You wouldn't
Wouldn't
mind
mind
whatever
it.
food,
Oh, no.
because of the
Yeah.
size of the plate. Doing my undercut. Once again,
There you go.
a couple of cuts, not taking it off the bat. I think most people mess up because they try and take it off the bat. Now, the finicky thing about a plate is that it will reseal back to the bat very quickly, right? So, if you could babysit your plates, you want to come back to it and cut it again. Not take it off, just cut it again halfway through, and then when it's closer to like the suede leather hard stage where you feel comfortable moving it, then you cut it again and you take it off. Like, you have to make sure it doesn't re-stick, because if it re-sticks as it dries, that will break the plate, right? 'Cause it's going to try and shrink, it can't shrink, it'll crack and break. Now, a tapas plate is a little different, and I learned to do these because the restaurant I was working in served tapas. And their point of view is like, if we're doing wet tapas, you don't want this because it can get like all over. You want it to have a higher wall to it. So once again, I come down. I pull. But the difference is now, I'm not going to go out. Instead, I'm going to give a very small wall and pull straight up. Not by a lot. Maybe 2 pulls is the max. Okay. And I'm going to smooth out the inside, of course. Come straight down with it. I want to really make sure it's straight. I'll put this right against here and throw into it.
So if you're making a set of these, say, for the restaurant you were at, is your intention to make them nest, or?
Not necessarily, but they do fit very well to the idea of nesting.
Okay.
No, my intention was to make sure it wasn't any bigger, so the owner didn't say like, "No, we're giving away too much food."
Oh.
But I think when I went over bowls 2 weeks ago, I was saying like, if I made a tiny little bowl, it was to a certain specification, so that way he wasn't losing money on ketchup.
Oh, interesting though. I guess in bulk, yeah. it
I'm gonna
makes
pay
sense.
attention to that in restaurants now, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
But you think about it, like when they give you those little to-go sauce, they're a very specific size. They
Yeah.
don't range in size. You know, there's a reason. It's only so much. They estimate. They know how much. If they start giving away too much, like, well, now we're losing money on the
Right.
ketchup. We can't afford to lose money on the ketchup. Margins in restaurants are very small. That's why they make most of their money on the bar. All right? So this is really good for anything that's got a sauce to it, like a small amount of, like a sauce, right? So any sort of like salads, wet salads is pretty good for, meatballs and sauce, that kind of stuff that you could just pick at. That's why it's like a wet tapas plate. Okay? So those are pretty much like the three main plates that I'll make. This technique here, as you can see, you can make it as big or as small as you want, right? So if I made this maybe like an inch or two smaller, and then trimmed sort of like a little divot in here, now I have a saucer for a cup, for a teacup. It works just like that. I make this bigger, I got a platter,
Right.
right? It scales up and down. It's the same technique, just like the bowls. It scales up and down to whatever you need it to be. Right? This is just the two main things, dinner plate and bread plate or appetizer plate. And this is specific to anything with the sauce, but not obviously pasta. Pasta's a little different. You want more of a shallow bowl for that. Okay? So that's how you make some plates.